Welcome to Chuck's World of Infinite Mojo, brought to you by Holy Chuck Burgers. Our business is burgers.
Good morning, Katarina Witt. There's no such thing as bad boys, only boys with bad hair.
Sponsored by Maxwell's Clothiers, your bespoke tailor since 1961. And now, your host of Chuck's World of Infinite Mojo, Chuck Bastie. And we're back on Chuck's World of Infinite Mojo. I'm Cam LaRock, your producer, once again. And of course, I'm with Chuck Bastie. Chuck, what's going on?
Hey, Cam, it's a great day for a podcast today.
It's a great day. It should be a good one today.
Yeah, I'm going to say what the date is because we're not live, but we will record this and then air it. But yesterday was April the 4th, and most people might know that date as the date that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968. So therefore it was 55 years ago. Today, obviously the day after Martin Luther King, is April the 5th, and it's 55 years ago today that my next guest came into her power, where she actually started sharing a message right now that still resonated right now into her 90th year. So I'm really excited to have JaneElliott on the show today. And this is Jane's second appearance on Chuck's World of Infinite Mojo. She was on the show a year and a half ago as well. And we're going to get into a whole lot of just really confrontational topics here, but it's a conversation that's worth having.
Yeah, Jane was on the show last time. It was a great show. I watched that whole thing and loved every second of it, so I'm excited to have her back. So I'm going to get out of here. I'm excited to hear from Jane. I think we should bring her in as soon as possible. So.
All right, let's bring her up. There we go.
Ignore that sound. My telephone's ringing.
Is that a landline? It sounds like a landline, Jane.
It is a landline. It is a landline.
Who still has a landline?
I'm sorry. I know I'm weird. I still have a landline. I hate those little palm things. I really despise them.
Yes. Well, I mean, I'm glad you still have one, because if you didn't have one, I wouldn't have got a hold of you like 7 or 8 years ago when I first contacted you.
That's right.
And you had a number that was a cell phone on your website at the time. And I'm just like, I'm going to call JaneElliott, because she's not going to answer. She's not going to get back to me. And you picked up the phone right away and was like, I got nothing. I don't know what to say. Now I'm like, how do I not sound creepy? Long-time listener, first-time caller. How do I say this? But you were remarkable.
Oh, well, thank you. People have thought that I was remarkable for the last 55 years, and they've been trying to wipe out the mark ever since that 55 years ago when I did that blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. They've been trying to erase me. It isn't working. The exercise is, but erasing me isn't working.
I'm glad that you brought that up as well, because when you and I were having a conversation to have you back on the podcast, you came down with a nasty cold, and we had to postpone. And as I remember my girlfriend was saying to me, she was like, "Oh, okay, well, I guess it wasn't meant to be timing wise right now." And I'm like, you know what? Before I was always of the opinion that there's something blocking me or getting in my way, and now I just kind of realize that no, things are fluid, and if it's not now, it's supposed to happen another time. And as it turns out, today is your 55th anniversary of you doing the blue eye, brown eyes exercise,
Right.
not experiment. And it was 55 years ago today, the day after MLK was assassinated, that you started this experiment, this exercise, which I thought maybe you could explain as well, why you did it, and just talk a little bit about what your state of mind was the day after MLK was assassinated going into school.
I was absolutely, totally angry, bewildered, disappointed in what this country had been able to do. If Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X hadn't gotten so close together, if they had joined forces at that time, they would have upset this economy tremendously. So they had to die. And we killed them. This country killed those two men. That wasn't a single person who killed either one of them. This country arranged for those two men to be gone. And I was furious. We were studying the Indian unit at that time. I still called them Indians. Oh my God, we've got to get over that. And we were going to learn the Sioux Indian prayer that says, "Oh, great spirit, keep me from ever judging a man until I've walked a mile in his moccasins." So while I was watching Walter Cronkite and Dan Rather interview leaders of the Black community that night, After Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, I thought, tomorrow I'm going to allow my third graders, all white, all Christian third graders, to walk in the shoes of a child of color in this country for a day. I decided that I would do what we have done in this country, what Germany did, what Hitler did in Germany. He picked out people to die based partly on the color of their eyes. And I decided that the next morning, if my students didn't understand what we were talking about when we talked about the killing of Martin Luther King Jr., not only was I going to teach them about that killing, I was going to arrange for them to walk in the shoes of a child of color in my classroom for a day. And I decided that I would treat my students positively or negatively on the basis of the color of their eyes, just as Adolf Hitler did. Now, the scary thing about talking about this right now and talking about Adolf Hitler right now is that there is a man under indictment who was a former president of the United States who bases his idea for how we should govern on the book The New World Order, which is the writings of Adolf Hitler. Talk about things coming around. This is coming around, folks, and we need to realize that. I didn't know about racism until I put my third graders through that blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. I learned more that day and the following Monday than my kids did because I had more to learn. I had, 33 years by that time, 35 years, of being trained to be a racist. My kids had only had 9 years of it. So then they had this strange teacher who said, look, blue-eyed people aren't as smart as brown-eyed people. They aren't as clean as brown-eyed people. They aren't as civilized as brown-eyed people. All you blue-eyed people, move your chairs to the back of the room. That had never occurred to them. They had no idea that you could be judged unfairly on the basis of the color of your eyes. It was absolutely astounding what we learned that day and what I learned. And as a result of that, now I give speeches every time anybody asks me to do a podcast, an interview, a speech anywhere. I say, yeah, I'll do it, but you need to know that I'm going to tell the truth. I'm not going to say that white people are white people. There are not white people. There are no white people. There are no black people. There are no yellow people, and there are no red people. We are all members of the same race and the same color group. We are all members of the brown color group. And this finger stands for the brown color group. No matter you can call it what you want to, but if you look at your hand, if the thumb is the white race, the first finger is the black race, the third finger is the brown race, which is the most numerous race on the face, color group on the face of the earth. The fourth finger is the yellow group, and the fifth finger is the red group. The brown group is the biggest, and it's been here the longest, and we're all members of it. Now, if we could all put all of those fingers together, we would make something, a power that could burst the walls, break the walls of racism and all the rest of these isms if we decided to do it. Racism is a lie. People need to know, and I didn't know this at the time, but the word race, meaning a separate group of people, came out of France in 1580. Before that, race meant an athletic contest. It didn't mean a specific group of people. So here we are in 2023, still believing in that lie that was concocted in 1580. How much longer are we going to live with the lies that were concocted during the Spanish Inquisition? It's time to give that up. Have I said enough here now? Should I go back to bed?
This is your show. I'm just a curator of it. I'm just happy to have you on the show.
A curator belongs in a museum with dead things. Please don't.
We're going to get to the museum in a second because you said American Indian as well, and I wanted to correct you on that. I wanted to bring up the New York Times article that was written on you 3 years ago, and I'm just going to have our producer Cam pull that up right now. And this is actually really remarkable. A teacher held a famous racism exercise in 1968. She's still at it, and that was 55 years ago today. And obviously you've been on Oprah, you've been on Jada Pinkett's Red Table Talk as well. You've been doing this for 55 years. I think it's kind of funny, not funny, but it's actually very interesting that when I reached out to you again to have you on the podcast, you'd said, you better rethink that because I've been banned everywhere. And I'm just like, I don't care. Like, I'm glad you've been banned everywhere because that's real progress. Because if you were saying things that people wanted to have you, wanted to believe, there'd be no value in having your voice out there talking about how we can be an ally for people that are being, either suppressed, oppressed, discriminated against. And this goes against all human constructs. You and I had talked a little bit about this off screen about religion. about, right wing, left wing, and all these distractions that we have, really keeping psychopaths in power to divide human beings just from being souls having a human experience. So I just thought we'd speak a little bit about that.
Okay, go ahead. Are you done now?
Yeah, I defer to you.
Okay, well, the first thing, the most terrifying thing I learned that day was in my class that year, I had several little boys who were dyslexic and who will be dyslexic till the day they die. On the day those brown-eyed boys were on the top in that exercise, they read words I knew they couldn't read, and they spelled words I knew they couldn't spell. And at the end of the day, Billy Thompson came up to my desk and said, Miss Elliott, where's my spelling paper? I said, what do you want it for, Billy? He said, I want to take it home and show it to my mother. She thinks I can't spell, and I can. And he started to cry, and I did too, because he didn't know until April 5th of his third grade year that he could read and spell. And he didn't know because he had been living down to teachers' expectations of him. We all know everybody in the Riceville school. It's 1,000 people, and everybody knows everybody else. Most of them are related to one another. But this kid had been told since he got into school that he wasn't a good learner. I couldn't believe I had taken the courses. I had taken the psychology courses to get my certificate, my teaching certificate. We talked about expectations. I never realized how powerful expectations are until the day I did the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. On that day, I had in my classroom the Lutheran minister's daughter who came into my classroom reading at the 6th grade level. She was tall, she was blue-eyed, she was blonde-haired, she was absolutely beautiful and brilliant. And on the day she had the wrong color eyes, that child walked with her shoulders hunched as if to ward off an expected blow. She stumbled when she crossed the classroom. She made mistakes in reading and spelling, and she forgot how to multiply. And I thought, my God, what have I done? I destroyed that child with the way I treated her and the words I used about her. It was absolutely terrifying. Then came the weekend, and I was afraid that people would be burning a cross in my front yard. I went home, nobody responded except a couple that we were supposed to go to the lake for a picnic. And that mother called and said, we can't go because Rick's sick, so we can't go. So I said, okay, fine. So the kids, my 4 kids and my husband and I went out to the lake for our picnic just with ourselves. And there sat that woman and her husband and all their friends at a picnic table. And as we walked toward them, one of the men said, did anybody bring the fried chicken and the watermelon? Those people are here. So, yeah, the day after I did the exercise, all things changed for me and for my husband, for my parents, and for my children. We are now, I have been known in that community for the last 55 years as the town's only N-word lover. On Monday, we reversed the exercise, and then's when the real learning took place. I expected those blue-eyed boys to get even with those brownies, because I had heard the things they were saying they were going to do to them, when they were in the boys' room during Friday, when the brown eyes were on top. They were going to do horrible things to them. I didn't want to go back to school because this was going to be hell on wheels. I went into the room, I reversed the exercise, and those blue-eyed kids didn't get even. I watched something happen that shouldn't have been happening. They refused to abuse those who had been their abusers. I didn't mention it, and then on Tuesday, before we discussed the exercise at all, each child had to write a 4-paragraph composition telling who Martin Luther King Jr. was, how the child had felt on Friday, how the child felt on Monday, and what discrimination is. After they had finished writing, we got in a circle, in the magic circle, and I said, now, I've got to know. You blue-eyed boys said you were going to get even with the brownies. None of you got even. Why didn't you get even? And that year and every year after that, those kids said almost in a chorus, because we found out how it feels to be on the bottom, and we didn't want to make anybody feel as bad as we did. Now, if pale faces could simply remember that, if those that we call white who aren't white, melanemic is a better word than white, if melanemic people could just remember that when they're 9 years old, those kids don't want to get even. They don't want to cause the kind of pain in another person that person caused in them. I think that's the most positive thing I learned as a result of that exercise. It taught kids how it feels to be on the bottom, and they refused to go along with something like that again. And if somebody was doing some bullying things on the classroom, on the playground, they'd come in and say, that teacher lets so-and-so do this and this. She ought to go through the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. And I'd say, I'll talk to her because you're absolutely right. That's what's going on, and I'm glad that you kids recognize it. They didn't go along with that kind of behavior anymore. They put a stop to it because they know how it feels to be on the bottom. They refuse to tolerate it.
There's one thing that keeps popping up in my mind while I'm listening to you say this, and it's just the word empathy. And I know you said the word exercise as well, but as a 9-year-old kid, before I've had the shit kicked out of me by life or indoctrinated or whatever I'm going to learn as a male moving forward, especially in my case as a white, blue-eyed male moving through this world, it's just empathy is just the great connector about you hit the nail on the head. Like, we don't want anybody else to go through what we went through. It at 9 years old, they believe that it's part of their humanity, of not wanting to hurt other people, or like they shouldn't. And then for whatever reason, obviously we know what the reasons are. Moving forward through that, we get to the case where we're in the George Floyd, trial, where God bless that one woman who took that 9-minute video of watching George Floyd die, for the whole world, because if she doesn't take that video, there's no evidence. Everybody gets off. And that goes on, like you said in my podcast last time, that goes on 100 times a day, everywhere in the country. And now I have people saying to me, like, that's just an isolated incident. I'm like, no, there's cameras everywhere now. And that's the reason why that's coming to fruition now, because it's always been going on. There just hasn't been cameras everywhere up until this point in history. So I wanted to play the clip. We had you on the show last time. I'm going to apologize in ahead of this clip because, clearly I didn't realize how much eye makeup I was wearing on this clip. And I'm just going to...
How little I was wearing.
Yeah, and I'm not responsible for your therapy of what the experience is going to happen to you when you see this clip. And clearly I was, dyeing my beard a little too dark back then as well. So I'm going to have Cam pull up that clip as well and have your take on what the George Floyd, we had you on the day before the George Floyd conviction was going to come up with Derek Chauvin of what it was going to have. So we didn't know. And this was your response for what we had on that. Cam, can we pull that clip up? The jury's going to debate about this. They're going to deliberate. They're going to come back. So I want to get your insight on that, the Derek Chauvin trial, the reaction, what you think is going to come out of it. What is your prediction?
I have a terrible fear that they'll find him not guilty. And that if that happens, we will have a revolution in this country. We will have chaos, and rightly so. You see, the same kinds of things that happen to Mr. Floyd happen to Black people every day in this country. We deny that. If we don't see it, it doesn't happen. We don't see it. They see it. I got emails from people, Black males, who say, I made it home today. I was afraid I wouldn't. What does it feel like to live in that kind of situation? In the land of the free, in the home of the brave? You see, I live in the land of the free. Black women live in the home of the brave. I don't have to be brave to stand up and say these things, and I know why.
Your thoughts on that?
What?
Your thoughts on that?
Well, that old woman is right. I'm sorry, but she's right.
Force is strong with that one.
she's white, but she's right. Anyway, these things happen to children and adults of color all day, every day, still in the United States of America. I still get letters from people who are being abused, not because of the color of their skin, but because of the self-imposed ignorance of the people who are running this show. If you haven't read the book, The System by Robert Reich, you better get it and read it, because then you'll understand why this is happening, who's making it happening, what the people who are making it happen are getting out of it, and why 1% of the population of the United States controls the wealth.
Yeah.
Racism is an extremely profitable enterprise, and you need to realize that.
Yeah, and I love Robert Reich. I'm glad that you brought him up as well, because I think, much like yourself, from his administration with the Clintons as well, now taking his own platform, speaking up against what you're saying of the system as well. Very courageous for a man like that to step forward, because you're going to take it in the teeth. You're going to get punched in the face by the system and by society, and just like yourself, back 55 years ago, that's just not something that was accepted by people back then. And I had to watch. I don't know if you watched Yellowstone, the TV series as
No,
well.
I don't.
So, I mean, they've had two prequels before this with Yellowstone, 1883 and 1923. And when watching these, it absolutely horrified me. Absolutely horrified me of how the natives were treated, and they tried to be historically accurate. And I had to actually go back and I took a trip to Washington D.C. this fall and go to the Museum of the American Indian, as it's called, which is a terrible name. But I mean, I want to segue this to where this hatred and vitriol is coming from. There is a man named BrianCranston as well. I wanted to bring up this clip on his interpretation of what MAGA is and where this movement is going against dividing people as well. So, Ken, can we cue up the BrianCranston video, and we'll play that up there, and I'll get your reaction about this video on the other side.
When I see the Make America Great Again, my comment is, do you accept that could possibly be construed as a racist remark? And most people, a lot of people go, how could that be racist? Make America great again? I said, so just ask yourself from an African-American experience, when was it ever great in America for the African-American? When was it great? So if you're making it great again, it's not including them.
Your thoughts on that?
It was great for the African Americans when they first got here, because they were here 20,000 years, between 20 and 10,000 years before Christopher Columbus got here. It was great for them before palefaces arrived. They were having a ball, and the people who call themselves American Indians today are absolutely opposed to being called Indians, because this isn't part of India. Columbus hadn't reached India. They were never Indians. Every tribe, every group of natives had a name in a word in their language that stood for the people, because they consider themselves the people. They weren't Indians then, and they aren't Indians now. They didn't realize that they came from Africa because they couldn't remember what happened 20,000 years ago. But indeed, we all came from the same continent. We came from a country in Africa, every one of us originally. So it's time to give up the word India, the word American, and it's time to give up the word Indian. America, citizens of every country, from the northernmost point of Canada to the southernmost point of South America, are Americans, because all of that is the Americas: North America, Central America, South America. So it's time for us to stop calling ourselves America and call us what we are: the United States of America. And united is the most important word in that title. Now, if you don't want to use all those syllables, if that's too difficult, then call us the U.S. And U.S., those two letters together, spell the word us. We can call ourselves U.S. citizens and still be part of the Americas without insinuating that the only important part of the Americas is that 48 contiguous states, Alaska, Hawaii, and the islands off the southeastern coast of the United States. Now, I've said this so often that it sounds like a recitation instead of a remark. People, we've got to get it out of our heads that the world looks like the Mercator projection map. Look at this map. See Greenland hanging down here like a great big ripe plum?
Yeah.
Yeah, on this map, Greenland is bigger than South America. South America, all right? Here's Greenland. It's a flat out distortion of the whole thing. In order to teach in an American way, in a U.S. way, in a fair way, you have to use the Peters projection map. Look at Greenland on this map, and then look at South America. These differences, and Africa, and look at the size of Africa.
Massive.
You realize that you could put the United States and several other countries inside the African continent and still have room left over?
Yeah.
Of course you don't, because we don't teach the truth. We teach something. We use a map that was made by the man who created this ridiculous situation, was commissioned by the Pope to make a map that showed the spread of Christianity. So on this one, the equator is 2/3 of the way down the map. The northern countries are larger than the southern countries, and so you can't call this the northern hemisphere, because hemi means half. This isn't half of the sphere. This is 2/3. We've got to stop using this map. At the bottom of the Mercator map, in on many of the maps, it says South America is actually 9 times larger than Greenland. Why don't teachers read that on that legend and tell that to their students and then say, now, boys and girls, and whatever you think you are, we aren't going to use this map anymore. We're going to use this map and bring in the Peters projection map. Now, I don't get anything except satisfaction for telling people about this map. It's time for us to change what we are teaching in social studies, because using the Mercator map is anti-social studies. You're teaching a lie. It's time to stop teaching the lie. What was your question?
Well, where I wanted to go with that is like, so in this indoctrination that we're talking about, I just keep coming back to the same idea that we are being led by a psychopathic leadership group of 1/10% that is trying to keep us all divided. Education is an amazing way to keep people suppressed and oppressed and down and indoctrinated. I wanted to bring up Donald Trump as a talking point, as not a political figure, but as a movement, in how the religious right has really surrounded themselves with Donald Trump, even though he's the most unreligious man that you could ever think of. He's never read the Bible. He says the words like 2 Corinthians as opposed to like 2 Corinthians. That just gives everything away. And yet he still captivates the religious right. And I just coming back to, they voted for Donald Trump. And here I'm a Canadian. I don't even have skin in the game politically, but where I draw the line is like when you have indoctrination and ignorance that's floating around, that's gaining momentum of demagogues and people like Donald Trump that are like, and it could be Joel Osteen, it could be like Kenneth Copeland, it could be Jimmy Swaggart, it could be any of these people, and there's just as many narcissists on the left as there are on the right. I'm not debating that. But what I am saying is that there's a movement now, and obviously with the indictment of Donald Trump yesterday, there's now going to be a movement, just like when you were on the show last time we were talking about George Floyd. And I'm looking for your prediction right now as far as how this country or how the continent is now going to take the indictment of Donald Trump, because it's a threat to his control and power and to the religious right as well. And they've got no play after this. How is this going to play out?
I think that what you saw yesterday and day before yesterday, when he came out to speak and only a few hundred people showed up, I think that those ignorant people who followed him before have watched how many people get sent to prison or taken jail time, are in jail now because of following his suggestion and creating an insurrection. I think a whole lot of people have decided, wait a minute, I'm not going to sacrifice 1 minute of my life in jail and have my kids in trouble because I can't afford to feed them because I'm in jail. I'm not going to follow this fool anymore. I think the fact that they didn't come out in massive numbers to protest, as Marjorie Taylor Idiot Greene told them to, they didn't come out because they're smarter than she is. And they know that what she's saying is wrong. And they know that she's like Daisy May in the Little Abner comic strip. She got no brain. She's a fool. She's an absolute fool. And they aren't foolish enough to go through what those people who are in jail are going through to please Donosaurus T. Rump. I think this is proof of learning on their part. I was absolutely delighted that all the explosions the chaos that we were supposed to have if he was indicted didn't happen. And I watched the fools who stood there in Mar-a-Lago and waited for their idol to come through. And I thought, the man's judged by the company he keeps, and the best of company's none too good. And that's what they were to me. They were people who didn't know any better than to praise a man who can't read, who can't spell, who can't think correctly, and who is a total narcissist. And they finally have decided not to follow him. I was pleased. I was pleased at the small group of people who were waving at him and giving him the thumbs up. Well, I would give him the brown finger because we're all brown. Because we're all brown. This is the brown finger. Now remember, this is about the number of brown people in the world. No, I was pleased with their reaction.
Okay. And he's got, like I said, off camera before we started with this, but he's got a very tough month of April coming up. He was arrested yesterday, arraigned. Next week, he is going to have to deal with Letitia James and there's a potential of a $1 billion civil suit against the Donald Trump organization. And then after that, he has the Fox trials. And I'm not going to say Fox News because they're not news, but the Fox propaganda unit is out there, and they're going to have to testify openly about them lying about the election and that they knew that they were lying. And then, there's going to be a whole lot of, throwing Donald Trump under the bus from that. And then more importantly, in 3 weeks from now, there's going to be the E. Jean Carroll case where Donald Trump's going to have to testify in New York about the ejaculate that's still left on her jacket. And after he's been arrested yesterday, they're now going to have his fingerprints and his DNA from swabbing him. And now there's going to be an absolute connection between the two. And I'm thinking that in 3 weeks, if that goes true, Donald Trump will then be a convicted rapist at that point. Do you think that will change anything in the line in the sand of how people have supported Donald Trump after that point?
I think it will change a lot of women's minds about Donald Trump. Those women who are now following him are going to say, whoa, wait a minute. Maybe we should put that piece of clothing in the museum along with Bill Clinton's piece of Monica Lewinsky's dress that has Bill Clinton's semen on it. This is not something new in the history of humankind. This is not something new in presidents of the United States. This is not something new in some men. But you need to realize that most women are totally opposed to the kind of thing that he's been doing and the kinds of things he's been able to get away with, and women vote. What people forget in this country is that now women got the vote and they're going to use it, and they used it yesterday. So we're going to see white Melanie Meeks people's worst fear come to happen, which is people of color are going to be the numerical majority in this country within 25 years. That's a fact. It's happening. And now we're seeing people of color in places of power that they have never been before. And they are doing a good job, a better job than many pale, stale males have done in those same positions. So we're going to have to get over the idea of the superiority of white people, since white people don't exist.
I thought Georgia was an incredible example of that. Typically a white and bright state. Since Jimmy Carter has, obviously, been out of relevancy as a politician, that's always been a staunch red state. And then to see Raphael Warnock and them overturn Georgia in the last two elections, the midterms and the presidential election as well.
I think that means people are getting smarter. I don't think it means they're getting less racist. I think it means they're getting smarter. I think that those who have been denied the right to vote for years didn't vote because they thought their vote didn't count. Yeah. Now they're finding out that not only does their vote count, but they can change the situation if enough of them go to the polls. And that's what's happening. And that's the reason for this fear. And that's the reason for MAGA. Make America great again. What he means is make America hate again. Yeah. Make no mistake about this. That means make America hate again. We have to have division. If we are all united, we are harder to conquer. But if he can divide us, if people can divide us because of our religion, because of our color, because you can't divide us because of race, because there's only one race. But if we can use what we call race to divide us, then we are vulnerable. It's time for us to stop being vulnerable and decide we're all one race, we're all citizens of the United States of America, and we are going to preserve what the founding fathers started. However, there had to be some founding mothers in order for there to be founding fathers, but we seem to leave those out pretty much all the time. And that's interesting too, because now women are in a position where they never could have been when I was a kid. Women on the Supreme Court, the last person put on the Supreme Court, that fabulous, melanaceous woman, oh my God, we are making steps forward. And she is going to wipe out Amy Coney Barrett.
You're talking about Ketanji Brown Jackson?
Ah, yes. Yeah. Oh my goodness. What a woman. What a brilliant individual to sit there while she's being questioned by those four ignorant, tall, pale, stale males. And that's exactly what they are, asking the dumbest questions I've ever heard in my life. And she would just take a drink of water and look at them and answer the question in a sensible way. while they thought of another stupid question to ask. It was
She's-
it was disgusting.
She's better than me because if I watched Kavanaugh's hearings and how
Oh,
he
don't
just
say
looked
that,
like a
Herb.
toddler. Like I'm like you. Like if I was blindfolded or if I was blind, and I just heard him, didn't know what color skin his was, what religion he was, didn't care, and I'm like, if you were just electing him on temperament, a judge can never have the toddler-like reactions that this cat is exhibiting at the highest level where and the worst part is he knows this is being taped. He knows the world is seeing this, and he still couldn't help himself of just, I like beer. I like beer a lot. And me and Squee, we liked beer together. And like, you guys are making this really hard for me. And it's like the first time this guy's ever been out of Chevy Chase Country Club and never had anybody ever question him anything because he was like a white Maryland, like male coming into this as well. So I was shocked by that. But Ketanji Brown Jackson was just like, if she would have said something like, Senator, I'm going to answer your question by asking a question. Who ties your shoes in the morning? Because clearly it's not you. Do you use Velcro? Or is it laces that somebody else has taught, where the rabbit jumps over the log and then they twist it? Like, can you explain to me how you became senator when you don't know what the hell you're talking about? I'll wait. And I think that was just blowing the entire courtroom up. But of course, she had to have some sort of professional decorum because she's an adult. And adulting is hard, but she did it. But she gave everybody a glimpse of what is possible when a person of color who's been minimalized or marginalized their entire life comes into that spot and then says, I'm here to serve. I'm here for justice.
But
And
the frightening thing about her for white males is we weren't successful in marginalizing her. We did everything we could to marginalize her, and she succeeded in spite of it.
Yeah,
and
it
it's
did
like,
work.
oh, good Lord, look at what this woman has done, and look at how brilliant she is compared to these four fools.
Yeah.
It was, if we could just show those clips in social studies classes and in civics classes, if they still have them somewhere, and I'm not sure they do, but we still teach social studies. If we could show those two clips of those men and that woman, we could change the way people feel about people in an instant, because they will, most of us would relate to what she's doing in a positive manner, and would relate to what they're doing in an absolutely negative manner, because it made us look so foolish.
Yes. I'm almost reminded of Mandela when I watched the movie Invictus. Morgan Freeman played the character of Nelson Mandela. And after he had spent, I want to say it was 25 years plus in prison, which I can't even imagine what you would go through. And then coming out and then saying to all of his people of color, no, we are not going to rub this in their face. We are not going to take away their sports, because then we resort ourselves to their level, and we're not going to be at that level. And that never works. I'm reminded of MLK with his quote about darkness. And we'll bring that up at the end of the show, because when we were down in Washington, D.C., I walked the wall, and there's the quote that MLK had. Before we go there, I wanted to ask you, there's a clip that JonStewart, who I love, the comedian, was talking with an Oklahoma State senator, and I won't actually mention his name because I don't think he should have the airtime. But they're talking about gun control. And I'm just going to cue that tape up as well with Cam, and then we'll get your reaction to this on the other side.
Are you infringing on that performer's free speech?
They can continue to exercise their free speech, just not in front of a child.
Why?
Because the government does have a responsibility to protect.
I'm sorry?
The government does have a responsibility in certain instances to
What's
protect
the
children.
leading cause of death amongst children in this country? And I'm going to give you a hint. It's not drag show readings to children.
Correct, yes.
So what is it?
I'm presuming you're going to say it's firearms.
No, I'm not going to say it like it's an opinion. That's what it is. It's firearms. More than cancer, more than car accidents. And what you're telling me is you don't mind infringing free speech to protect children from this amorphous thing that you think of. But when it comes to children that have died, you don't give a flying fuck to stop that because that shall not be infringed. That is hypocrisy at its highest order.
And that's where I want to tie the hypocrisy between the right and what they stand for, just to get your comment on that.
Well, controlling guns is fairly easy. All we have to do is make it illegal for anybody to produce an assault rifle and sell it to anybody who is other than a member of the military. That's all we have to do. But you see, once again, guns are a really money-making enterprise. The people who produce those guns are making billions of dollars off them. Why would the people who they elect to Congress, whose elections they pay for, stop producing the most valuable, the most money-making thing they make, which is guns? We're all about, somebody has said a long time ago, red, white, and blue is nice, but the color we most value in this country is green. It's the color of our money, and it's all about money. You have to read the system before you understand that we're being had on a daily basis by the people who are running this show, and they're running it to make more money for themselves, not for the poor, not for the middle income, not for the teachers, not for well, it makes good money for the undertakers. But we have to do something about this. We have to do it. We have to do it now. We have to get off our polyunsaturated fatty acids and go and vote these people out of office, and do it this next election. We have to be very careful about who we vote for, because we have had 4 years of being treated the way, some of us being treated the way the Jews were treated in Nazi Germany.
Yeah, and
I'm mistake about that.
As a Canadian, I'm almost curious about this because I don't understand. So I'm going to ask for your understanding about this, or to educate me on this. When it comes to guns, I mean, like, we understand that the Americans, the United States citizens, have a right to bear arms. Obviously, it's in your Second Amendment.
As a member of an organized government organized militia.
Well, control the militia, which is in the Second Amendment, and I get that. But like you said, there's money behind it, and money will contort a lot. And where I'm going with this is these powerful NRA lobby gun lobbyists, and big pharma, big oil that have bought their politicians. I think that all these politicians should have to wear uniforms like NASCAR drivers, where all their advertisements of where they're bought and paid for in their campaigns. This is where I'm going to go with my money. This is where it's bought me from this lobby. And just like Robert Reich has actually spoke about in the system, in his books and his YouTube videos and his education, is really calling out, it doesn't really matter who you vote into office, because they're bought. It depends on who they're bought out by and where their alliances are to those powerful lobbies that are. It's legal in the United States. It's legalized bribery to get those lobbies in place, to buy their politicians, to get their documentation or their laws in place to protect their best interests. And I don't understand that.
Read the book, The Color of Law. Have you read it?
No.
Get the book, The Color of Law, and read it, and you'll realize why they are there, and why they are still there, and why they will always be there until the United States of American population decides that we've had enough of this. We haven't decided that yet. But Donald Trump should have been the thing that made us say, enough. Enough isn't enough. Enough is too much. We've got to stop these people in their tracks, and we've got to stop them now. But if you have people like that beautiful melanatic woman on the Supreme Court, if we get 2 or 3 more of those, this whole thing is going to be turned around. Because when they take something to the Supreme Court, right now, if you take something to the Supreme Court, you're taking it to the sperm court, because that's all those men are interested in, is how their sperm cells are being used. Eventually, we're going to have a Supreme Court again, and we're going to have people who know what they're doing and who know that they're supposed to follow the law and insist that other people follow the law, not follow the money. Right
and I'm
now,
curious
the last
about
few
this.
years, they followed the money.
You've mentioned Ketanji as a melanated skin person, but there's also another one that's on the Supreme Court, Clarence Carter, obviously, as a person
Clarence
of color.
Thomas? Clarence Thomas?
I say Clarence Carter, sorry. I was thinking
Jimmy
about
Carter would
stroking.
not appreciate that. That'll drive Jimmy Carter.
Well, he doesn't matter. I mean, Clarence Thomas and his crazy wife Ginny. I don't understand the dynamic of Clarence Thomas. Can you explain him to me
He said when they put him on the Supreme Court, when he was elected to the Supreme Court, when he was chosen for that position, he said, I never studied this kind of law because I didn't want to be accused of trying to promote my race. He never studied constitutional law, but he got on the Supreme Court because he was a less than brilliant, melanaceous man. You don't dare put a brilliant, melanaceous person on the Supreme Court because they will do it right. Clarence Thomas was more than less than brilliant. He was just, my dad would say about him and about Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump says that he himself is a genius, and I'm sure that's how Clarence Thomas feels about himself. My dad would say about those two men, if they were half as smart as they think they are, they'd be twice as smart as they are. Now, if you put numbers to that, genius is 140 points, half of that is 70, and 70 is twice 35. That makes the two of them blithering idiots. And the kinds of things that they've said and done and pushed for prove that my father was right.
Yeah, and I like I said, I really struggle with Clarence Thomas. And
he was a mistake. He was a mistake. He was a mistake. And so are the last three people that Mr. Trump put on the Supreme Court. They do not belong there. Yeah. And they were there only because there was enough money handed out quietly to get them put where they are. And because Donald Trump is a raving racist. And he knows that he wants on that Supreme Court people who are like him. And that's really frightening. That's frightening that you could do that to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has been supreme. It's no longer supreme.
Well, I don't even think that, and this is where I'm just going to disagree with you slightly, because I don't think Donald Trump had anything to do with that. I think that was all Mitch McConnell. I think Mitch McConnell was the one person who just took that away from Donald Trump and just made sure he stacked the courts with all his federal judges and the three appointees that he had. We all obviously know what happened with your attorney general now, Merrick Garland, how his appointee was held back at the end of the Obama administration. And then when that election came down, they lost that seat when Trump was elected. And of course, he was able to put three appointees, which is unheard of in one term, as a one-term twice.
Well, of course, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's
president.
Unreal. But you see, what we have in Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell is a repeat of Charlie McCarthy,
yeah,
and Edgar what's his name?
I know McCarthy, obviously McCarthyism, obviously.
But no,
McCarthy.
I'm talking about Charlie McCarthy and Mortimer Snerd in early television. Edgar Bergen would come out on the stage with two hand puppets, one on each knee. Charlie McCarthy and Mortimer Snerd. And he would move their mouths with his hand up their rear end, and he'd move their mouths. And his voice, he'd throw his voice in as though it were coming out of their mouths. These two men, Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell, remind me. I'm old. I'm old. They look like and they act like.
Those were silent pictures, Jane.
Yes. No, those were not silent pictures. That was in television. I'm not that old. You need to realize. Try to find a cartoon of thing with Charlie McCarthy and Mortimer Snerd on it, and you're going to see McConnell and McCarthy right there in front of your very eyes. It is absolutely terrifying. If you're my age, you remember those things. Kids today, people under the age of 50 do not know what I'm talking about, and they're going to say, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Well, after you see a clip of Charlie McCarthy and Mortimer Snerd, you'll realize that you are looking at Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell.
I'm actually going to one-up you on this one with my generation, because I'm a Generation Xer. And I'm going to pull out the Muppets and go with Statler and Waldorf, those two Muppets. Like, those, that's my counter to your counter. So I'm going to say, for my generation, I'm going to go with Statler and Waldorf. Yeah, you know what? And you know what? Like, just to be funny about this, because it's hard to talk about racism and not be funny about this, because it's such a dark topic. But I really love Jim Henson, the creator of the Muppets, for doing this, because I can imagine when he went into a studio and said, "Okay, guys, I got this idea for puppets, and they're going to talk. We're going to call them Muppets." And they're like, and there's a frog, and he likes his pig, and they're not really sleeping together, but they're boyfriend and girlfriend. And then there's a professor, and then a Fozzie Bear who's a stand-up comedian. And the look of disdain on these people's faces, that would be like, where are you going with this? We're going to put this on TV. Why? And then when he did it, I'm going to go back to my Statler and Waldorf. He put those two guys in that critique chair to laugh at himself. because that was the world laughing at him. And that's how I feel sometimes, is that I have my own Statler and Waldorf, or your McCarthy and your Schneer, or whatever his name is. You know,
Mortimer Snerd. You have to remember Mortimer Snerd. You have to look
Snerd.
it up.
Yeah. and to take that context, because they're always going to be there, those two. It doesn't matter the names you give them, or what Muppet it is, or what puppet it is. I find that if you're speaking truth and you're speaking against the establishment and the systematic suppression of what it's designed to do in order to keep power and control and money into the very elite few, you're going to get these guys that are going to come up there and attack you like you have been for the last 55 years. So before I lose you, I want to get going to my trip down to the United States. Thank God COVID is over. And as a neutral third party Canadian, I can now cross borders again. But I was able to go down to Washington, D.C. For those people who know me, my dad was in the Canadian Armed Forces, and we had a posting at the embassy in Washington, D.C. I grew up in Northern Virginia in a little town called Vienna, just outside of Fairfax. And I was educated there until I was in grade 3. And me going back into Washington really brought back a lot of memories for me, because it was where I took field trips. I went to the zoo for the first time and saw the pandas, which I just adored. The Lincoln Memorial, the mall, the reflecting pool, the monuments, the Capitol Hill, obviously the White House, Jefferson's Memorial. And this time I went back and I did things a little differently. And I brought some pictures back, and I wanted to kind of get your take on some of these things as it pertains to racism as well. Because I went to the Museum of the American Indian, and I also went to the Holocaust Museum. And there's the visitor entrance for the Museum of the American Indian. It's still called this. And when I asked them why it was called this, they came back to me and said, because the American Indians named this. And I said, okay, great. When was that? And she said, 1923. And I said, okay, so that was 100 years ago. And we don't have a better name for this as well. But when I went into this museum, it was absolutely massive. There's 4 floors. It has a huge internal lobby that goes straight up to the roof with a nice big sunlight. And we're just going to roll a picture here, Cam. This is something I never knew. I was today years old that day when I saw Bad Acts, Bad Paper, that every single treaty that the Europeans had made with the native populace was infringed upon, but only 100% of the time. They literally reneged on every single treaty that they ever wrote. And me, as a North American educated white young boy, thought that the natives had lost wars just like they had in Europe, and that just like in the spoils of war, land goes to the victors. He has the gold, makes the rules. And this was just conquering another nation of people or a populace, and it wasn't. We reneged on every single treaty. The next slide was this, and at least they're actually creating a narrative in this museum now. Great nations keep their word, which obviously the United States didn't.
Hey, there should be an S in front of the word word.
The words, good, nice catch on that.
Be in front of it, not at the end of it. It becomes sword. It becomes sword.
And
S-W-O-R-D.
This was a very sword. Yes, I see where to keep their sword. Great, keep their sword. That's actually even more poignant. This was a very sobering day. Then I went across to the Holocaust Museum before I walked down to the Lincoln Memorial, and I just sat in front of that big marble statue, and I've seen that 100 times, like at least dozens. And I was actually sitting inside my own shame at that moment of like, what have we become? We've made monuments to this, and here's a man who emancipated the slaves and enabled progress 160 years ago.
But also said we should send these black people back to Africa, back to their own land.
And I mean, for his time, like everybody at that level there, like I have to keep reminding myself, like my father grew up in a time where our country had a different flag. There were different rules for segregation, and he grew up in that. And I can't compartmentalize his belief system growing up of what he's learned to unlearn, because unlearning is hard. It takes a lot of effort. So I have to give Lincoln his space. He wasn't perfect, and I think society now wants people to be perfect in their way.
But hey, he was perfect in a way because he was a Melungeon. He was a Melungeon. He was part black,
Yes.
part white, and
hair.
part Cherokee Indian. And that's a fact. And it's time for us to start teaching the facts about Abraham Lincoln. Much
Yeah.
of what he was about was because of how he was raised and what his background was.
I think Abraham could have benefited from my sponsor, Mark Anthony, for more hair products. Because this is what happens when you actually, like, the 80s was a disaster for me because there was no product, but now there's product as well.
Wait a while, it'll be like this.
Yeah, it is right now. I just have a great color stylist.
I refuse to go that way. I refuse to do it.
I'm too
and then
vain
there's
not
this,
to.
then there's the Martin Luther King monument, which looks nothing like him.
No, and I mean, like, when I went to this, it took me a little while to find it on the map, but I was blown away, Jane. Do you know why I was blown away with this? Have you been there?
Well, no.
Okay, so when you're looking where Martin Luther King Jr. there in that statue is looking, you can't see the other side, but it's across the waterway for Thomas Jefferson's memorial, who was a slaveholder.
Right.
What brainiac came up with that idea that here's a man who was a leader in civil rights that is now responsible for at least progress of people being able to vote? And there he is there, and me in front of him. But he's looking out across the water at Thomas Jefferson's memorial, who was a slaveholder, who in his time freed 3 slaves. Wasn't even one of them wasn't even his mistress, Sally Hemings. And I thought to myself, somebody really messed up on this one as well. But I will say,
Martin Luther King Jr. has his arms crossed, which says, "I don't believe a word you're saying."
fair point.
Yeah, that's perfect. That is perfect. He
He's
is saying,
indignant.
I'm absolutely opposed to everything you're saying. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Jefferson. You're brilliant, no doubt about it. But
Yeah.
I've got my arms around you.
And he has a great wall. Here's the memorial here. The wall, as you walk up this mall, has all of his quotes on there that are just, worthy of spending the time walking through that. That was a long day. We can just roll these, Cam. They're too small for me to read with my bifocals. That's the darkness quote. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. And then, was it only can't drive out hate? Only love can do that as well, which is just brilliant. This was a quote. I think he's in Oslo, Norway, walking up and down. And I mean, I was the only person there that day. It was a gorgeous day in fall. So I had my time just to reflect with this as well. And I was just reminded about what the cost of progress was. And I thought it was very ironic that today, or even timely, that yesterday was April the 4th, today is April the 5th, and you're able to join us on the show to talk about 55 years ago for you.
And I should have been forgotten after April 5th of 1968. But because of the message of seeing little white children be treated for a day, the way children of color are treated for a lifetime, the exercise is still alive. What we learned during that exercise is still alive. And the film is being used all over the world to teach about the ugliness of people who refuse to learn the truth. We do not want to know the truth in this country. And one of the reasons for the Proud Boys and all the rest of those ridiculous groups of white males is their fear of not having power because of their losing their numerical majority in the United States of America. Give it up, people.
Yeah.
Only 15 to 18% of the human population of the earth is classified as white. We have never been in the majority, and we will never be in the majority because we do not exist.
Yeah.
And if every one of us white folks would trace our DNA back as far as we could, we would find that some of our DNA came from a country in Africa. That is the way it is. That's the truth. Get used to it and realize that you and I are 30th to 50th cousins.
Yeah.
Since we both our ancestors also came from Ireland.
Yeah, potato. Yeah. It's funny because the Irish were probably the people that were probably the most discriminated against as white people, and I say this all the time.
Absolutely.
To Christians here. My dad was in the armed forces, and my dad was not a smart man. I still don't think my dad was a smart man. He said something to me that I've never forgot. He said, "Son, we don't serve so that way we can so that we can protect our way of life. We serve so that way people have the right to choose for themselves, especially if we disagree with it. That's what freedom is." And Christians only came to North America because they were persecuted by other Christians. There's been nobody who's been worse to Christians than other Christians, not Muslims, not Jews, not Hindus, not Taoists. Like, Christians were the number one persecutor in the world, in Europe. And we, as the pilgrims or the settlers that came to North America, had to get away from that hatred and that diabolical tyranny of lack of freedom to come here. Now, when I hear people of faith say, I want this to be a Christian nation, I'm like, you're missing the entire point of why you have the right and the privilege of worshiping the way you would like to, that suits your agenda or your belief system. Because if you didn't, somebody else would be trying to repress your ability to believe in Episcopalian, Presbyterian, Catholic, Protestant, whatever. There's 2,000 different sects of Christianity. And yet people just don't see that because they have their own agenda. And I had this one quote that I thought was very poignant. People don't want justice. People only want justice for themselves. They don't give a shit about justice for others if it doesn't suit themselves. And the way I look at it, that's what's holding power right now. They don't care about justice for all. Just like your Pledge of Allegiance says, liberty and justice for all. People want liberty or they want justice, but they don't want both, because if you had both, you would have peace and flow. And as it is, you don't.
But now, since you brought it up, let's go back to 1954 and take the words "under God" out of the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. They don't belong there, and they come just before the word "indivisible." We divided people deliberately when we put the words "under God" into the pledge. Either you believe in God and you're with us. If you don't believe in God, you aren't with us. Those two words, Dwight Eisenhower should never have allowed that to happen. He had the power to say no and not to sign that legislation. That's when all this nonsense began, and it got a strong foothold because of the words "under God" in the pledge. I used to tell my third graders, you people don't have to say the words "under God" in the pledge if you don't want to, because I had third graders whose parents didn't believe in praying publicly. And I said to them, you don't have to sign the words "under God" in the pledge if you don't want to, and you don't have to put your hands over your hearts. Because this is ridiculous. What we're doing is ridiculous. That's another form of indoctrination. I'm not an indoctrinator. I'm an educator. The word educator comes from the duck deuce, which means lead, the prefix e, which means out, the suffix ate, which means the act of, and the suffix or, which means one who does. An educator is one who is leading people out of ignorance. And you can't do that by enforcing the ridiculous idea that we have to say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag with the words "under God" in it. That is absolutely in opposition to anything you learn in the church.
Yeah.
But you want to remember that during the Spanish Inquisition, Torquemada and company killed 2,000 human beings in the name of Jesus Christ before they realized that they were killing Christians. So we have killed Christians. We have killed people in the name of Jesus Christ for a whole lot of years. It's time for us to realize it's not. Yeah, absolutely. It's time for us to realize that it's time to give that up.
And where do you? Again, I was going to bring this up as well, but since you've segued this, I'm a big hockey guy. Obviously, Canada, it's royalty up here. Hockey. They've been having an entire season this year of Pride jerseys for celebrating Pride. We just had Brian Kitts from the You Can Play Project on the podcast talking about inclusion for all. There's been people that in the NHL that have hid behind their religious beliefs and said, I'm not going to wear that Pride jersey because I don't believe in it. And then there's the people that are on the You Can Play Project and the inclusivity side. They're saying, we're not asking you to sign up for a newsletter. What we're saying is that everyone here is welcome and that there's nobody here that has to worry about, not feeling welcome or safe coming to the NHL hockey rink to enjoy hockey. And so, when it comes down to it, I look at this as another freedom. What's your take on that?
Well, I don't know what they're proud of, quite frankly. Is it pride, Pride?
Yeah.
Or is it Pried, which means we pried the Native Americans off their land and took it? So you have to be careful when you use words. And a whole lot of people are dyslexic in your pride and think, oh yeah, that's what you do when you want
Never
to
thought of that.
open a can and get the vegetables out. That's
Yeah.
exactly what we have done with Native American, what we call Native Americans in this country. It's time for us to realize that what we have done, we are still doing.
Yeah.
There are still people on the res who don't have running water, who don't have heat in their homes, who live in worse shape than they did when they owned the land. We have no problem with that at all. If you really want to practice what we preach, give Washington, D.C. back to the first people who came here. That means that it will be entirely the province of black people, because they were here first. Are we going to do that? We're going to give reparations, give them to the people who were here first, and that means those Native Americans. They were here first. Let's take them off the res and give them the land, and then let them live on it, instead of saying, if you leave the res, you can be arrested and put in jail if you leave the res. There's no freedom on the res. There's no freedom around the res. You have to realize that we have imprisoned a whole bunch of people who owned this land before we got here and killed them for it and stole it from them. Even though we signed treaties, we did not follow what we said in those treaties, and we still aren't. And we aren't going to. Make no mistake about that. The main difference between people of color and white people is when white people, I hate the word white, but that's what we call ourselves. When white people come into a new environment, they immediately adjust the environment to fit their needs. Think about what we have done historically. Yeah. When people of color,
we do.
right, when people of color come into a new environment, they immediately adjust their needs to fit the environment.
Yes.
Now think about the housing in this country and the housing in other countries, and who owns it and who put it up and how they put it up and why they put it up. The whole thing is so really interesting to realize what we are reacting to, what we as white people, so-called white people, are reacting to. We're reacting to the fact that if you came out of the northern climes, you were afraid for the winter, so you had to get ready for the winter. If you came out of the southern climes, you didn't have to worry about the winter. You just had to be a little more careful. But you see, we have our mentality is very different because of where we were born and where we were raised thousands of years ago.
Yeah. Before we go, I just wanted to get your prediction in the next year. So we're going to have a really tumultuous year coming up. Next year is the election, for the presidential election. And so after this summer starts with the Donald Trump show, where do you see this going as far as progress now? You're going to be in your 90th year in November as well. Where do you see that going to be evolving, just like we did with the Derek Chauvin trial? What's your prediction now of seeing the right slowly starting to lose grip and then being able to have more inclusivity for all?
I think that educators are the answer to this problem. Educators could start this week educating students to what was going on in Nazi Germany, compare it to what has gone on in this country in the last 6 years, and then refuse to allow their students to think that what is going on is right. Because I'm seeing now what I saw from the years from 1933 till 1945. I am seeing a demagogue who is being followed by people who don't know any better because we have failed in education. It's time for us to start teaching the truth in social studies so that these kids know why the founding fathers, what they were all about, why they were about that, why we fought the Second World War, and why we must not have to fight another war because of some despot deciding that we're all going to behave in a certain way according to his desires, according to his Hitlerian beliefs. I think we have to educate people to recognize what a Hitlerian situation looks like so that when it happens in their lives, as it is happening now, they will say, no, we do not want a third world war just because people like this man have decided that they're going to rule the world. We cannot have this happen. And many countries are now descending into the kind of thing that he tried to create in the United States. We need those democracies, and we need to preserve this democracy, but we'll only preserve it if women of all colors and all colorless and colorful women get off their fannies and vote people like this out of office.
Yeah. And before we go, I just wanted to thank you for being such a wonderful teacher and educator. I think if every single person who's watching this, even in their own lives, there's always been 1, 3, 5, 10 teachers in our lives that, saw the greatness inside of us before we saw the greatness inside of ourselves. And that gave us small wins, and that gave us confidence, and that made it safe to learn. And I think, with people like yourselves that has been educating your entire life, because it's just the right thing for you to do, and it's a passion for you, and your love and empathy for people has just been that great. I'm truly thankful for every great teacher I ever had in my life that took me aside, that corrected me, that educated me, that kept me accountable, that was just loving and caring and made it safe for me to learn. I didn't really realize that until I got a little older. I met a drama teacher of mine I didn't really like, and him and I shared a car ride to a funeral one time for like 3 hours. And I realized how wrong I was about this man. And I was absolutely, and I said to him, like, listen, I was going through a really hard time in high school, and I didn't like you. And I could see that it was 100% me, and that you made it safe for me to show up every single day and just express myself. And you didn't have any other agenda other than trying to make me a better person. And I owe you a big debt of gratitude for that. So on behalf of us to you as teachers, I want to say thank you.
Well, thank you for kind words, but I'm not like that teacher. I'm
I know you're not, but you're my kind of teacher, though. You're the tough one.
All right.
Well, JaneElliott, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show again. I'm so glad you're doing well and that you're still out there being feisty. I want to thank you. You're always welcome to come back on my show anytime. I always enjoy our conversations, and I want you to stick around after the show as well, because I just have a few more things to ask you as well. But I want to thank you for coming on the show.
Okay, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. That's JaneElliott, one of my favorite teachers in the entire world. We're going to bring up Cam LaRock, our producer, right now, and we're going to get Cam's take on JaneElliott's his first experience with JaneElliott here. What did you think?
Well, she lived up to all my expectations, I can say that. I mean, I watched your podcast from before, and oh my god, her answers just blow me away every time. You'll ask her a question, I'm sitting there, like, thinking one way, and then she'll have me just, why did I never think of it like that before, you know what I mean? Like, It just opens up your thought process totally.
Yeah, and I mean, like, Jane's not really shy of heart. I had a friend of mine that one time and we no longer speak, this friend of mine and I, she unfriended me and blocked me. I'm undoubtedly knowing she's going to watch this interview, not because of me, because she loves JaneElliott. But when I said, I have JaneElliott coming on my show, and she was like, Jane fucking Elliott? Are you kidding me? Oh my God, she's amazing. How did you get JaneElliott? And I have to thank Dr. Russell Barkley, because when I had Dr. Russell Barkley, the ADHD doctor, on my podcast, I asked him, why he accepted my invitation. He said, because I saw your interview with JaneElliott, and anybody who knows JaneElliott's a friend of mine. She's an amazing woman. So I was really thankful for that. So, yeah, and I want to thank you for joining us at home today, because, again, I know that you could have been anywhere that you wanted to be. The fact that you tuned in, I know, has more reflection on JaneElliott than it does on me. But that just shows exactly what kind of person that you are, that you would want to learn more and grow. And I want to thank you for joining us as well. I want to thank Holy Chuck Burgers for sponsoring the show, along with Maxwell Cold Ears and Mark Anthony Hair Products. This doesn't happen without a whole lot of help from Mark Anthony. So thank you for joining us for JaneElliott. And if you like this, please like, comment, share. Sharing is caring. People helping people is powerful stuff. So we'll see you next time.